breeze in Kyoto tonight is gentle, carrying with it the earthy scent of moss and old stone. You wander slowly, your steps crunching softly over gravel, past rows of weathered tombstones. Some lean precariously after centuries of rain and wind, their kanji inscriptions fading into illegibility. You pause in front of one that doesn't match the others. It isn't the moss that catches your eye, it's something else. A strange curve carved into the stone, a crescent. Beneath it, faintly visible, an inscription unlike any kanji, hiragana, or katakana. Curved letters, flowing, foreign, Arabic. Your heart skips. No way. You crouch, fingers brushing across the grooves, tracing it slowly. The letters spell, La ilaha illallah. There is no God but Allah. You whisper it out loud, hardly believing. What is this doing here? In Kyoto? On a centuries-old gravestone tucked away among samurai graves and temple gardens? It feels surreal, like you've tripped and fallen straight into an alternate timeline nobody told you about in history class. The gravel crunches under your shoes as you step back, staring. Around you are symbols of Shinto shrines, Buddhist pagodas, family crests of samurai clans. But this is something else entirely. Historians still argue whether this grave is genuine, whether it truly belongs to a Muslim samurai, or whether the Arabic script was added later, a mistake or a prank. The debates are fierce, quietly fought in academic journals and over dusty manuscripts. But your gut says no. This is real. The deeper you look, the more threads begin to unravel. There are whispered records, old monk diaries speaking of a stranger's faith. There's a 17th century ink painting of a man in samurai armor, with a tiny, almost hidden symbol of the crescent stitched into the fabric under his collar. Coincidence? Artists being creative? Or something far more intentional? You begin digging, not literally, not yet, but into the archives, online databases, and crumbling libraries. And the deeper you go, the stranger it becomes. Trade between Japan and the Islamic world wasn't as non-existent as most people think. There were Arab, Persian, and Indian merchants sailing as far east as the Ryukyu Islands by the 13th and 14th centuries. There are even records, scattered, half-forgotten, of Muslim traders visiting Nagasaki, Hirado, and Kagoshima. Historians still argue whether they were merely transient merchants, or if some quietly stayed, planting the first seeds of a hidden faith. But the real shock comes from an obscure 16th century Japanese travelogue mentioning southern men who bow their heads to the ground facing west. You blink. Facing west? In Japan, that's toward Mecca. It's the first time your skeptical brain falters. A pattern is forming, a thread weaving between trade routes, faith, and swordsmanship. And then, tucked into the appendix of a forgotten historian's notes, you find the name Hasekura Tsunenaga, and another, whose name was never written. The first was an envoy to Europe, the second, a ghost, an unnamed figure, a samurai who, according to this cryptic line, found truth beyond the shores. Goosebumps prickle your skin. Who was this? And how deep did it go? You glance back at the gravestone, the crescent, the Arabic words, the moss gently swallowing the edges of history, as though time itself were trying to hide this story. But it failed, because you found it now, and whether it leads to a forgotten page of Islamic history, or the secret life of a samurai who bowed toward Mecca under the cherry blossoms, one thing is clear: this night's journey has only just begun. The next morning, you find yourself walking deeper into Kyoto's tangled web of narrow streets, temple gates, and hushed neighborhoods. The sunlight filters softly through lines of sakura trees, their petals scattering like confetti from the heavens. But today, the usual charm feels like a backdrop to something bigger, something quietly pulsing beneath the surface of history. You pull out your notebook, pages already cluttered with scribbled theories, arrows, underlines, and the same phrase circled 3 times: the lone crescent among cherry blossoms. It's strange. In the endless textbooks about Japan's Sengoku era, the Warring States period, you've read about warlords, daimyo, the relentless pursuit of honor, bushido, Zen Buddhism. But never once did anyone mention Islam or a Muslim presence in feudal Japan. And yet here it is, hiding in plain sight. You trace back the timeline. Medieval Japan wasn't exactly the most open place for foreign influence, but during the 14th to 16th centuries, Japanese ports saw traders from everywhere. Portuguese, Dutch, Chinese, even Persians. The Ryukyu Kingdom, down in Okinawa, acted like a sponge for international trade. And while historians still argue whether Muslim merchants ever made it past the southern islands and into the Japanese mainland, scattered records suggest they did. A 15th century Ryukyuan scroll mentions men of the West who abstain from wine and prostrate upon the ground. A subtle hint, a footprint in the sand of history, barely noticeable unless you're looking for it. Your steps take you toward an old trade district near Fushimi. Here in the 1500s docked foreign ships, some from as far as India, the Ottoman lands, even Africa. The streets are narrower here, lined with wooden houses whose beams creak with centuries of wind and rain. You imagine it now, a Muslim merchant stepping off a ship, adjusting his turban or cap, eyes scanning this strange land of paper screens, swords, and silent shrines, a land where honor is everything, and yet it isn't the same as the submission he knows from his faith. One record grabs your attention more than the others. A Japanese diary dated around 1570 makes a brief cryptic note. Today, I saw the man from the southern lands bow his head to the ground, not once but 5 times, always toward the sunset. Toward the sunset. West. Mecca. It sends a chill up your spine, and you wonder, was anyone watching him? Anyone curious enough to ask, why do you bow? Your imagination fills the scene. A samurai, perhaps a mid-ranking retainer, walking past the docks, his armor clinking softly, his hand resting on the hilt of his katana. Stoic, observant, suspicious at first, but then intrigued. Because there's something familiar here. Something about discipline, about ritual, about a quiet surrender not to a lord but to something higher, unseen, yet all-present. Historians still argue whether that moment, the first real encounter between a Japanese warrior and a Muslim traveler, was recorded or simply lost to the wind. But the gravestone you found says otherwise. You thumb back to your notes about that stone, the Arabic, the crescent, the kanji partially eroded but still legible enough to reveal a name, Takahashi, followed by characters for faith and truth. The more you dig, the more the pattern sharpens. Tales of a samurai who, for reasons no official chronicle explains, began refusing sake, who was seen withdrawing from his fellow warriors during certain times of day, always at sunrise, midday, afternoon, sunset, and nightfall, always facing the same direction. It's too consistent to be a coincidence. A merchant's faith meets a warrior's code. 2 worlds that should never intersect. And yet, here in the whispers of old Kyoto, they do. Your footsteps slow as you stand before a small, almost forgotten shrine tucked behind a grove of bamboo, a place where the merchant and the samurai might have once sat, shared words, shared tea, perhaps shared something far greater. You glance at the sky. Clouds drift lazily past, indifferent to the mysteries of men. But down here, under the cherry blossoms, a secret waits to be fully uncovered.